Henry II was not born to become the architect of something as enormous as modern law. He never imagined that courts and judges and rules followed by millions of people centuries later would grow from choices he made almost by accident. To him, life was a storm. He ruled a kingdom torn by rebellion, ambition, and old wounds left behind by kings before him. And when he stepped onto the throne in 1154, England felt like a cracked shield that needed rebuilding more than ruling. Henry never set out to reshape justice. He simply wanted order, peace, a country that stopped tearing itself apart. But the way he pursued that order changed the world, in a way he never planned. He grew up watching chaos. His mother, a rightful heir ignored by nobles, spent years fighting for her claim. Civil war burned through England, brother killing brother, barons carving out their own private kingdoms. Henry learned early that power meant nothing if you could not control the people beneath you, and control meant rules. Not the wish of a king whispered behind castle walls, but rules that reached every village, every farm, every road. When he finally became king, he carried this memory like a scar. A country without law was a country waiting to fall apart again. But in the medieval world, justice was not justice. It depended on who you were, who your lord was, or how loudly you could shout your innocence. Punishments changed from village to village. Every noble kept his own court. Trials were done with oaths, riddles, or strange rituals. A man might be forced to hold a burning iron or plunge his hand into boiling water to prove he had spoken the truth. God would protect the innocent, they said. But Henry did not trust miracles. He trusted men, and he trusted systems. So he began quietly reorganizing England, one small change at a time. He sent royal judges across the land, riding from town to town with parchments and records. They listened to disputes, kept notes, and returned to the king with patterns of what worked and what failed. Henry did not design a system. He watched it grow. Each case heard by a judge added another thread. If two villages had the same problem, he wanted the same solution. If two men were accused of the same crime, the same rule should apply. Slowly, the old chaos bent toward consistency. For the first time, justice no longer belonged to the powerful alone. Anyone, even a poor farmer, could ask for the king's judgment. Yet Henry's ideas also grew from fear. He feared barons who ruled like little kings. He feared sheriffs who cheated the crown. He feared rebellions rising from the cracks left by his grandfather's wars. Law was not just fairness. It was a weapon, a way to pull power away from the nobles and place it back in royal hands. When he expanded royal courts, he shrank the authority of men who had grown to comfortable deciding justice on their own. Some barons hated him for it, others obeyed, but only because he was too strong to challenge. But Henry was not only battling the nobility, he was also wrestling with a force even more powerful in the medieval world, the church. Priests and monks lived under their own laws, separate from the crown. If a clergyman committed a crime, even murder, he was judged only by church courts, which rarely punished harshly. Henry saw this as a hole in the kingdom's armor, a place where justice could slip away. He wanted one kingdom, one rule, one path to judgment. But trying to pull the church into his system was like trying to hold fire with bare hands. The conflict that followed changed not just Henry's life, but the shape of English law forever. He pushed, the church pushed back, and in the middle of this struggle stood Thomas Becket, once Henry's friend, later his rival. Henry never intended to create a martyr. He never planned to send knights to kill an archbishop inside a holy cathedral. But when Becket fell beneath their blades, blood spreading across the stone floor, it marked a point of no return. The world reacted with shock. Henry's enemies whispered curses. His supporters stayed silent in fear. The king who wanted order had accidentally unleashed chaos again. This moment forced Henry to retreat, to reconsider, to weigh the cost of victory. Law could not crush everything. Some forces, he learned, were not his to command. But the changes he set in motion continued moving, like a river that refused to stop flowing. His royal judges became trusted figures. His system of juries, groups of local men sworn to speak truth, replaced trials by ordeal. His insistence on written records formed the skeleton of something much larger than he ever imagined. a common law that outlived crowns, dynasties, and even the medieval world itself. He did not see himself as a visionary. He was a man trying to hold his kingdom together. But the more he tried to preserve peace, the more his decisions shaped a new kind of justice. One you could predict, one you could challenge, one you could trust. What began as a tool of control slowly became a promise of fairness. Yet even as England grew stronger under this new order, Henry's personal life collapsed around him. His sons rebelled, driven by ambition and resentment. His wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine, turned against him. The empire he built was large, too large for one man to hold. The laws that organized England could not organize his family, and as rebellion and betrayal circled him, Henry learned a terrible truth. He had created order for a kingdom, but could not find it in his own home. But his legacy was already written, not on monuments or battlefields, but in the way people sought justice. A farmer disputing land, a merchant claiming theft, a widow defending her rights. All could appeal to the same rules, the same king's court, the same structure Henry had shaped with frustration, fear, and stubborn effort. He may not have meant to build anything lasting, but sometimes history is shaped by accidents, and Henry II was one of them. He tightened the reins of power, trying to control everything. Instead, he created something that lived long after him, a system where law belonged not to the king alone, but to the people who needed it. Henry II lived long enough to see how unpredictable his world could be. Even when wrapped in laws he tried so hard to shape, as his judges rode across England creating order, his own family unraveled into the same kind of chaos he had spent his life trying to prevent. The man who taught an entire kingdom that justice needed consistency suddenly faced the one place where consistency failed him completely: his sons. Henry had built an empire that stretched from Scotland to the Pyrenees, from the Irish shores to the heart of France. It was too large to divide peacefully, yet too precious not to try. He named his eldest, Henry the Young King, as heir. But the title brought the boy more pride than responsibility. The younger sons, Richard, Geoffrey, and John, all wanted their share before their father was even dead. And behind them all stood Eleanor of Aquitaine, brilliant, powerful, and increasingly bitter. Years of disappointment had hardened her. She had watched her husband strengthen his authority over England, but tighten control at home. When their sons rebelled, she supported them not out of cruelty, but out of exhaustion. She wanted freedom for herself and a future for her children. Henry could command judges, barons, and armies, but he could not command hearts. When rebellion erupted, it spread like wildfire. Castles rose in defiance. Sons marched against their father. France supported them out of opportunity, not loyalty. Henry, the king who believed in patterns and order, suddenly stood in the middle of a storm made entirely of his own blood. He fought back with the same stubborn will he had used to govern, but this was a war with no winners. The irony of Henry's life was becoming painfully clear. He had spent years trying to limit the power of barons so kings could rule with fairness. Yet he had raised sons who believed kings should not rule alone. They wanted autonomy, land, and crowns of their own. To them he was not the architect of justice, but a wall standing in their way. As rebellion simmered, the system Henry had built continued working quietly around him. His judges still traveled. His laws still spread. His reforms still deepened. Even as his family fell apart, the kingdom held together better than it ever had. And this, in a strange way, proved the strength of what he had created. England no longer relied on the personality of a king. It relied on structure. But the deepest wound had already been cut years earlier in Canterbury. The death of Thomas Becket never left Henry. Even when he acted as though time had moved on, the memory lurked like a shadow. Every decision that hinted at royal power over sacred space reminded people of the archbishop lying in blood before the altar. Henry had not swung the sword, but the world believed he had guided it. No legal reform could wash away that stain. He walked the line between authority and guilt for the rest of his life, never sure which one defined him more. Yet while the church and crown continued to negotiate fragile peace, another problem rose before Henry: age. He had always been unstoppable, a king who outrode outworked, and outthought everyone around him. But now his body slowed. His temper grew sharper. His trust faded. The betrayals from his sons left him bruised beyond healing. And as the rebellions returned again and again, Henry's energy drained like water from a cracked vessel. When the young king died suddenly of illness, Henry was struck by grief he never expected. He had feared his eldest son's ambition for years, yet when death took the boy, Henry saw the tragedy beneath their rivalry. A son who wanted too much, and a father who could offer too little. Richard, now the remaining heir, stood tall and proud, a warrior, not a diplomat. He respected his father's strength, but not his rules. Their conflict hardened into something unbreakable. Richard wanted the crown immediately. Henry wanted obedience. Neither could bend. France fed Richard's ambitions, and soon father and son met again on opposite sides of the battlefield. When Henry's health finally broke, he was cornered, exhausted, and unable to continue fighting. Terms were forced upon him. He was made to read a list of his enemies, a list of names that had betrayed him. When he reached the final name, he stopped breathing for a moment. It was John, his youngest son, the child he had trusted most, the child he had called loyal. With that single word, something inside the king collapsed. Henry retreated to Chinon, the fortress where he had once planned his future. Now it became the place where his life slipped away. Fever consumed him. The weight of regret crushed him more than rebellion ever had. Men said he whispered names, his sons, his wife, Becket, as though trying to sort the pieces of his life before it ended. When he died in 1189, he died believing he had failed as a father. But history saw something different. The man whose personal world fell apart had built a public world so strong it could survive even him. Richard took the throne after Henry's death, and later John after Richard. Both ruled differently. Both lacked Henry's restraint. Yet the system they inherited did not break under them. Juries continued. Courts continued. Records continued. The idea that justice should not depend on a single man continued. Henry's legacy survived not because he demanded it, but because it had already slipped beyond his control and become part of the kingdom itself. His reforms formed the roots of something that did not yet exist in his time. The idea that law belonged to a nation, not a ruler. Generations later, when Magna Carta was signed, many of its demands rested on the foundation Henry had already built. Even centuries after that, when modern courts and constitutions took shape, echoes of Henry's decisions still appeared in the way truth was tested, the way disputes were settled, and the way justice was written down rather than spoken by whoever held power. Henry II never intended to shape the future. He was a man trying to survive the present. But the laws that began as tools of control slowly became tools of fairness. The courts he built to strengthen his rule became courts people trusted to protect them from rulers. He reached for order and accidentally created balance. He struggled against chaos and unintentionally built stability. He tried to limit rebellion and ended up giving future generations the structure to resist tyranny. In the end, the king who spent his life wrestling with the weight of power left behind a different kind of authority, one that did not die with him. His laws lived in ink and memory, not in fear. His judges carried truth farther than any knight could carry a sword. And the world he shaped learned something he spent years trying to understand him. Self. That real power does not come from force or armies or crowns, but from rules people can believe in even after the man who wrote them is gone.